I spent the last 10 plus hours studying trading psychology from one of the best trading psychologists there is on this planet, Dr. Brett Steinbarg. And in this video, I'm going to be going over a PowerPoint of the things that I've learned from him on self-discipline and eliminating bad trading behaviors. Let's jump into it. All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. Like I said, the point of this PowerPoint is just to learn how to get rid of bad. So what I've basically learned from Dr. Brett Steinbarg, and I really hope I'm saying that name right, is he kind of goes over how to get rid of bad trading habits. And in this PowerPoint, I'm just, like I said earlier, going over all the key lessons I've learned and how I plan to use them as well. So the first thing, I just want to go over the table of context. The first thing I'm going to describe is I'm briefly going to describe the different types of bad trading habits there are. Second, I'm just going to go over the cycle of self-defeating behavior, because there's stages to every bad behavior trait that you have in trading. And I'm going to go over each of the stages to kind of help and get an idea of how we plan to solve them. Third, I'm just going to go over the solution to get rid of most of these bad habits. And then fourth, I'm just going to briefly summarize. I want to run through this quickly to save you guys as much time as possible. So first things first, the categories of bad trading habits. You see, most bad trading habits fall either into one of these two categories, either greed-based or fear-based. And I'm talking about the bad trading behaviors that aren't psychologically behaviors, like, for example, anxiety. No, we're talking about like the actual manifestation of that emotion, anxiety, right? So we have greed-based, over-leveraging, over-trading. This is where you cannot control. This is more of like impulse bad behaviors that will fall under the greed-based category. And then there's fear-based. So taking profits early, moving stop loss, that falls under the category of anxiety, you're afraid of being wrong, things of that nature. Those are kind of fear-based trading, bad trading behaviors. So the stages of self-sabotaging behavior. There's 4 stages of each of self-sabotaging behavior, self-defeating behavior. And the first stage is always the emotional trigger. This is the cue. It starts the self-defeating behavior. It starts the emotional turmoil that you're about to face when going through with this behavior. The second is the shift in state of being. Usually it's 100% correlated to the trigger. So the trigger will cause you to shift from one emotional state to another. Third is a self-regulation attempt. This is just simply your mind's attempt to trying to recover from that shift of state of being emotionally, and it will try and cope with a certain type of behavior, right? And then last is the consequence of that behavior. So like I said, pretty self-explanatory. This is just basically the effects of the behavior. So I want to get into the first stage, the trigger. See, this is where it all starts. It's usually a scenario that produces a consistent idea that causes a shift in your state of emotional being. And I'm going to give an example here. For the last, I want to say 13 months, right? Since 2021 to, I think, mid-March 2021 to, I want to say mid-2023. I want to say like April. I have been hopping from strategy to strategy. And that was one of the biggest mistakes that I've been making. And it had cost me so much time, but the reason why was just unmet expectations. You see, I would have expectations for a certain strategy, results-based expectations, and when they didn't get met, it would cause me to be from confident to disappointed and feel a whole bunch of emotional distress. In my case, I'm going to use that example a lot to explain most of these things. But in my case, my trigger was unmet expectations. That's what started the process of me jumping from one strategy to another. That's what caused the shift in state of being for me, from confident to disappointed, dissatisfied, betrayed, everything, right? That was my trigger. And the key thing here is, if you can find the trigger, you can eliminate the behavior. But the hardest thing is just finding the trigger. And I've noticed with most triggers in trading, we'll go over some more. Say, for example, over trading, right? Or over leveraging, right? let's say over leveraging. Somewhere in between, there was somewhere in between from when you put on that trade where you over leveraged to a little bit of steps back, there was a trigger that gave you the idea to over leverage. Now, for this, it can be a lot of different things. For most people, for me, if I'm thinking, over leverage can stem from greed, and greed can stem from comparing yourself to others or believing that this next trade is going to be 100% winner. And if it's going to be a 100% winner, why not bet the house? Another example, revenge trading, right? So in revenge trading, the trigger is anywhere from the moment you started to revenge trade to right after you lost the trade. So if I'm thinking of a scenario, the only reason why I would revenge trade is because I feel betrayed by the market. I feel like the market took something that of mine and I want to get it back. You get? So from when I lost that trade, it can be a whole bunch of triggers, but usually the trigger is a thought or an idea, or it could be a belief as well too. In that case, it would be the belief of the market has betrayed you and took something from you. That would be your trigger that would start the emotional shift in state of being and also the bad behavior as well. But the key thing here is if you can find the trigger, you can eliminate the behavior. Second, the shift in state of being. So here's the thing. Feelings are a state of beings. They're not permanent things, right? Feelings, emotions, they determine your current state of being. If you're in an ecstatic, happy, well, then you can say your state of being currently is you are happy. If you're in a state of being, if you're depressed, then your state of being is your state is depressed, right? And these emotions are states, right? And it can go the same for confidence, anxiety. These are all states, right? So the key thing is, when most behavior happens, it's because a shift in your state of being. We kind of talk about going a little bit in my example from going from confident to disappointed, right? That trigger is the cause of the shift in your state of being. So it makes it understanding what your shift is, understanding how you shift from emotions, feeling wise, it definitely can help you find the trigger a lot easier. And like I said, they're determined by how you interpret the current situation or any certain situation. So emotions are determined by how you interpret the situation. It's just that simple. If you feel betrayed by the market, if you feel like the market took something that wasn't yours, you're going to feel angry, resentful, because you interpret it that way. If you can change your interpretation to it's just part of the game, it's just part of the hustle, you won't feel angry nor resentful to the market. You'll just realize it's just part of the game. And that's why I say every emotion starts from an interpretation that you have. And it's when he was talking about this, he made it vividly clear that each person can feel a different emotion to a current situation. And that's what makes the pros from the rest of the traders, is just because they've learned to interpret different situations in trading differently from the average and normal trader. That causes them a lot of, it practically saves them from catching a bullet, right? And the thing is about state of beings, emotions, they're never static. So they change and fluctuate very frequently. So now here's the thing. Here is stage 3. Stage 3 is self-regulation. What self-regulation basically is, if just to cut out the fancy words, it's the commencing of the bad behavior, right? So this is your mind attempt to account for the sudden shift in state of being. In my example, when I went from being confident to disappointed, I had to find a way to cope because the shift was so quickly and it was so painful to go from a happy state to a negative state. And that's why you'll hear most traders say you got to be somewhere in the middle. Because if you're on too far on one end, it's so easily and it's so tremendously easy to go from one side to the other. It's so easy to go from happy to sad. And that's why most traders advocate for being in the middle for most events. Like, I lose, I stay the same. I win, I stay the same. So they don't swing too far on one end, because when you swing far on one end, you're going to have to come back to the other. And it's kind of like a swinging, like, I don't know if you guys ever been to a doctor's office and you see like some of them sometimes will have that, I don't know, what is it, a swinging pendulum? I don't know the terminology, but I know it's like it's four silver round objects hanging on like wires, and then it's just going from side to side, right? And the ones on the far ends are the emotions, like happy and negative, right? But the one in the middle is where you're trying to be. You're trying to simply keep the same ground level of state of being, non-emotional as much as possible. But going back to my example, like I said, it's just the self-regulation is to cope with the current situation, because you've interpreted the situation a certain way that has caused it to go from one state of being to another. And this time you need your body to cope with it some odd way. So my coping, right, in the example of hopping from strategy to strategy, I went from confident and expecting a lot, expecting good things, and a little happy of what's next to come, or what I thought was next to come, to disappointed, dissatisfied, angry, resentful, right? And my mind, only way to contribute and kind of mend the pain was to, well, let's find another strategy. Why? Because finding another strategy gets rid of that disappointment. It sets new expectations and new hope for new results, right? Until you actually test those results out, and then you find out again that it's dissatisfying and it's disappointing. And then you just go through this cycle over and over. But the bad behavior is an attempt to cope. It's an attempt to mend the pain, like I said. And in my example, it was just simply finding a new strategy gives me new hope. The thing is, it's absolutely futile to fight against these behaviors, because it will only reinforce them even more. And what I mean by this is, I knew it was bad to change my strategy. I knew it, and I was trying so hard not to. And the very fact of trying so hard not to is the same reason why I change my strategy every time. Because at the end of the day, the only solution I knew to fix this problem was change my strategy. And at the end of the day, if it's either keep suffering from this pain or chase hope, I'm going to chase hope every time. So the last stage is the consequence, right? This is the feeling of disappointment and guilt. It's just the effect of the bad behaviors, right? And like I said earlier, most bad behaviors are methods of coping. So in my case of strategy hopping, the consequence was wasted time. The consequence was guilt every time I changed my strategy. I felt a certain way, in a negative way, every time I changed it. So last but not least, let's go ahead and dive into how we can sort of fix these problems and how we can learn how to fix some of this bad behavior. So what can we do? Like I said earlier, control doesn't come from fighting the bad behavior. That just reinforces it. Control comes from reprocessing the triggers that set us off in the first place. So Dr. Steinbarger, right, was talking so vividly about how no matter what you do to control the behavior, it just reinforces it. And the biggest reason, like for example, if you go to let's say, for example, you have an alcohol addiction, right? And you go to one of these places that kind of help you get sober, right? And the first thing they do is they say, they allow you to own up to your thing. So they say, I am alcoholic. And they have you keep repeating that. And Dr. Steinbarger was kind of talking about how that is very ineffective, because it just reinforces the belief, because they believe just because they're saying it, they gain control over it, when that's not the case. It's all about reprocessing your image of self to a point where you're not an alcoholic. And you keep telling yourself that you're not an alcoholic, you're not an alcoholic. Because here's the difference. If I say I am alcoholic and I drink, I feel no guilt from it, because I am who I said I am. But if I say I'm not an alcoholic and I drink, I'm going to feel a little bit of guilt, because I've made this publicly heard for everyone around me that I am not an alcoholic. And when people see you drink, it's like, okay, cool. First things first, what are people going to think of me after I said I'm not an alcoholic and they see me drinking? And it builds a lot of guilt, right? And that's what comes from That's where change comes from, or self-identity change. It's just simply, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't drink. Simple like that, right? So in order to change these behaviors, we have to do one of two things. One, the first things first, we have to target the trigger, because he made a very emphasis point on targeting the trigger, because that's the only way to change the behavior. And he said there's two ways to target it. The first way, I'm just kind of shortening it up so it's a little bit more understandable, is reprogramming our interpretation of the trigger. And then the second way is changing the trigger. So I want to go back to my example really quickly of changing your interpretation on the trigger. Going back to my example of strategy hopping. Every time I switched from one strategy to the next, it was because of I had expectations that were unmet. In order to eliminate that bad behavior, I had to deal with the expectations that I'm setting on the market. So one, it was either set no expectations on the market, or two, change the meaning of, or change what I expect. So if I say, for example, I've now changed it to, I can expect a consistent result over 50 to 100 trades rather than a trade by trade basis. And I can expect, as long as I'm making 2 times my risk, 2, 3, 4 times my risk, and I'm taking a sample size of trades over 40 to 50 trades, I will be a consistent winner. And it's just changing my expectations from winning on a trade by trade basis, understand that I'm going to lose a lot, to changing it to a new expectation that allows me to think in probabilities. That was my reprogramming of my trigger. Now, the next thing is you can just change the trigger. So going back to the example, I don't know if it would have had the same positive effect, but if I just change the trigger from having expectations to changing it to preference, like I would prefer to have a winning trade, but I'm okay if it doesn't. So there's 2 ways you can go about it. The main way, and the way that I recommend, is just reprogramming the interpretation of the trigger. So now you're probably asking, how can we find the triggers, right? So like I said, here's a couple of situations, or here's a couple of ways so far I've found it quite helpful to find the trigger. First one is journal every time you experience an emotional state or emotional shift in trading, and reverse engineer from there. So in my case, I do not like journaling. I think it's very great. I think it's very important, but I feel like my hands can't keep up with the speed of my thoughts. So instead, I do something that was recommended from Alex Hormozi, but it's crazy because I've been doing it even before he said it. And I promise you guys, I'm not a psychopath. I don't need to be put in a straitjacket. But I talk to myself out loud in a third person point of view. I portray that I am sitting in one chair, and the version of myself that's a professional, successful day trader is sitting in the other. And I just sit and talk. So sorry about that, audio cut out. But like I was saying earlier, I put myself in a third person point of view, and I act like I'm in a room with 2 chairs. One is the current me, and the second one is the professional day trader, consistent winner version of myself. And I just talk about the current situation that I'm currently feeling. And it's very weird. I don't know how I'm able to pull it off, but I sit, we discuss, and for some odd reason, every time we come up with a solution that makes the situation better. And I've learned that most problems that I'm facing, I usually do this with myself. And I've learned, when it comes to me, and I think this comes to most people, when you are feeling troubled and you need answers, most of the answers of what you should do are within yourself already. It's just asking the right questions. If you think what a therapist is, and this is not at all diminishing what they do, and the professionalism about them at all. But if you just think about what a therapist does, they ask the right questions. Now, what's difference between a therapist and everyone else is they just know what's the right questions to ask. But they really ask the right questions because they get you to become aware of the problem by asking the right questions, and your brain will automatically think of some solutions. And that's my way of journaling. But the whole point is to just understand what is causing the shift in state of being. First is understanding what is your shift in being, right? Is it from going happy to disappointed, confident to angry, joyful to resentful? What is the shift? What is the emotional shift? What's the shift in the state of beings? Once you can figure that out, then you can reverse engineer backwards. What is causing that shift? And once you realize what is causing that shift, that is what your triggers are. And then you could just think, you can go back to some situations and was like, how many times was that trigger present that caused this certain idea? And you'll see most of the time it's a lot. In my example, like I said earlier, it was the unmet expectations that caused me to shift from confident to disappointed. So I knew my shift in state of being was going from confident to disappointed. I knew it was because of unmet expectations that was previously, right? And then the second thing is just to replay the situation. So if you don't currently have an idea of what's going on, just replay the situation. Replay the exact situation, the emotions, the feelings. Sit down, close your eyes, lay back, and replay exactly what happened from bar to bar, right? Replay the situation. And in this state, I like this a lot because in this state, you are detached from the situation, right? You are absolutely detached from the situation. So there's a good thing and bad thing. The good thing is you can see where you did wrong. The bad thing is you're not going to be able to feel the exact same emotions, but you're detached from the situation. And in this case, you can kind of look like an overseer to your problems and see where are the missing links, what went wrong. But that's the most common ways I've kind of using triggers. And when they asked the question, when the question was asked to Dr. Steinbarg about how do you find these triggers, he just basically recommended journal every time you experience an emotional shift in state of being, right? So now, here's the most common trigger forms, right? And these are just some examples, but just to give you a little bit of idea, something to brainstorm on, and somewhere to start. The most common trigger forms, fear-based, and fear-based triggers is just basically based off the potential to be wrong. So, for example, fear-based triggers the potential of being wrong on a trade. Because let's be honest, we only take trades if we have a reason we think it'll win. All right. And if you start to feel anxiety, it's because your expectation or your reason or your whatever of putting on that trade is potentially being violated. And you feel anxiety. It does cause you to close trades early, move SL up, all the bad behaviors, right? And then the second, self-esteem based triggers. So these are based on who you are. It's based on your self-worth, right? So let's say, for example, in my opinion, right, my unmet expectations, in my example, my unmet expectations just simply meant that I wasn't a good trader because I couldn't be profitable. And that was a big thing. My unmet expectations, I couldn't even win a trade, so I'm not a good trader. And I associated myself to the outcome so much to the point that I believed I wasn't cut out for this. Like, it had to be people that were smarter than me that did it. And it took me being open and seeing people who aren't necessarily smarter than me, aren't doing more than me, don't even know as much technical analysis I do, and are making way more money than I am. And it took that to happen in order for me to finally realize that. But let's get into it. The tactics. And these are all tactics from the man, the myth, the legend himself, Dr. Brett Steinbarg. And I'm really hoping I'm saying that name right. But these are tactics he recommended to basically fixing bad behavior in trading. So the first one is dampening anxiety. I don't know. I think I misspelled that. Whatever. Dampening anxiety, right? So this is just basically the exposure method. So it's exposing yourself to the situation so much that exact same situation, that exact same trigger holds no emotional toll on you. All right. So the first thing you want to do is you want to figure out the situations that typically set you off. So let's say in my example, unmet expectations, right? All right, no, let's use this for anxiety, because this is basically used for anxiety-based fears, right? So in my case, let's say losing a trade. This one was perfect. Losing a trade, right? Being wrong, right? So that's the situation we're going to kind of give an example of, right? So figure out the situation that typically set you off, me losing a trade, right? And then remember, the pattern can only change when you're in that pattern. And this was a key thing he went over. He said you can only change that pattern when you are actually in it. The goal is to get in that same exact pattern, but in a controlled state of being. So let's say, for example, to relate this back, losing a trade, right? Or let's say we're in profit and the trade is coming back down to our break even, right? We're starting to feel anxiety. That's our number one problem. The goal is to get back into that exact same situation, right? Exact same situation, but this time, sit through it and change. So for example, we're in a losing trade, right? And let's say we're in a losing trade, the trade's coming back to our break even and we close the trade early. And then it turns around and smacks our take profit. So instead of making, 3%, you only made 0.5%, right? You're frustrated, you're feeling all the negative emotions. That was your bad behavior, right? The goal is to get back in this exact same situation, but do something different, right? So you can do this through visualization, right? So you can sit down and close your eyes, visualize you in the exact same situation and do something different. That's the next technique. But this technique, I like to view it from what he said as in real life practice. So it's imagining yourself. This is what I recommend. Go get yourself a trade simulator, right? And try to put yourself in that exact same situation. You took a trade, the trade's moving up, and then it starts moving against you, right? It's moving in your favor and it starts moving against you. And in that exact same moment, if you have an anxiety of losing a trade, right? If you feel that anxiety, then it's not because you're fear of losing money. That may be a factor, but it's a fear of being wrong. And usually that fear of being wrong is because of the fear of being a failure. But anyway, let's jump back into it. You notice that, right? And you notice you're feeling anxiety. If you're feeling anxiety in a backtesting replay tool that has nothing on the line except your ego and pride, trust me, it is the fear of being wrong and it is the fear of being a failure, right? So you're exposing yourself to that situation constantly. Keep exposing yourself. So you're in the trade and it goes against you. What do? You're in the trade, it goes against you. You're in the trade, it goes against you. And you keep exposing yourself to that, right? So this would be just back testing hundreds of trades. Because every now and then you're going to get that situation. You keep exposing yourself to it. You keep exposing yourself to the point where when that trade starts to go against you, it doesn't hold the emotional power that it once did, right? And in that state, you're able to make changes. So the trade is going against you. Instead of closing the trade out, you hold it and you feel all that weirdness and you just keep doing it. You keep doing it. Keep exposing yourself to that exact same situation and exposing yourself to the solution. By making it familiar, any problem that becomes familiar is no longer able to hold such an emotional toll on you. Let's look at it in real life. First time you get cheated on, it feels crazy. It's just like, whoa. It's like a train wreck. The second time feels just as bad, but just a little bit less bad, right? Third, a little bit less bad than the second. Fourth, a little bit less bad than the second. Fifth, a little bit less bad than the fourth, right? And you keep going, and I really pray if someone gets cheated on this amount of times, man, you gotta look into it. But anyway, you keep going until the point where, let's say the 7th or 8th time you get cheated on, it doesn't have an effect on you anymore. That is an example of exposure method. It still has a little effect on you, but not as great as the first time. So it's exposing yourself to that situation over and over. Second one, this is for impulsive behavior in trading. Over trading, over leveraging. And this, I just kind of view it, I took notes from what he said, but I just want to make it very simple. for everyone. It's just basically visualization. In this case, you're doing the exact same thing in the first one. You're finding the problem. Say, for example, our problem is over leveraging. You're finding that problem, and then you're identifying whatever the triggers is. So let's say our problem is revenge trading. You find a problem. The trigger is that I feel betrayed by the market when I lose, right? That's your trigger. When I lose, I feel betrayed by the market because it was supposed to go in my favor. That's your trigger, right? It's an idea, thought, concept, whatever it is. You find that. And then your next, what he talks about is you want to put yourself next in a high state of concentration before you start visualizing. So you put yourself in a high state of concentration. So this may be, I don't know, put yourself through a bunch of math problems or something like that. Something to get you into a flow state. Something to get your brain working to the point where it's pumping and you got to really concentrate. And then once you're in that state, visualize yourself in the problem situation and explore different, more productive actions that you could take. So this would say, for example, right? The point, and what I believe the point is just to simulate or create or manufacture a similar feeling to when you are actually making the mistake. See, like with all these methods, if I could just summarize it, it's just manufacturing the situation in a controlled state of being, right? Manufacturing in a controlled state of being, and instead of doing what you consistently do, make a change your actions and see what the result is. But you can only do this if you're aware. So with visualization, with the exposure method, it's helping you build that awareness, you could so-called say. That's what I truly believe it is, honestly. But like I said, the goal of this idea is just to put yourself in a high concentrated state of being, right? Where you got high concentration. And then just visualize yourself in the problem or in that situation or about to revenge trade, and explore different options. So it's like close your eyes and just sit there. Okay, cool. I just lost a trade. I feel betrayed. I feel angry. Instead of taking it out on the market by saying, no, I'm going to get my money back and get another trade. How about I teach the market another lesson? How about I take it out on the market by walking away from it? Yeah, she'll really feel pain then. It's a joke. It's a joke, but it's a different way. It's a different route you can take. So it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I'm not going to trade you because you stole money from me. I'm just going to boycott you. And you just walk away. Imagine you try that, right? This is a joke, but imagine you try that, right? And then that you walk away for the day, 5, 6, 7 hours. You come back, you no longer care about it. That anger has dissolved because the greatest remedy for anger is delay, right? So that could be something. It's a whole bunch of things you could do, but the whole point of it is just to visualize yourself in that situation while being in a high concentrated state, and visualize yourself doing a different, more productive action and see what the potential results could be. And the last one, positive self-talk. So what I realized from this is positive self-talk, when he was talking about it, it sounded mainly like it was just for building confidence. So building confidence. And the goal is to rehearse the patterns that you want to do today, the good behaviors, while being in the energized state of being. You want to, it's basically like self-affirmations, but you want to associate these self-affirmations to a state of being. So every time that you get into this state, you automatically result or you automatically think that you are in your best state, best self, which causes you to change different actions. That's what I kind of so-called got from this. And I kind of related to this because I used to when I made a discovery of something that I think would greatly improve my trading, I would act as I am teaching it to myself, and I would feel energized from it. And every time I got in that teaching mind when I was trading, it improved my trading drastically. I would no longer feel resentful or scared of certain outcomes and all that positive jazz. And that's what I kind of get from it. It's just basically associating a state of being to a, I guess you could so-called say, better version of yourself. So every time you enter that state of being, you become a better version of yourself, and your actions show that as well too. The main nuggets, as we're approaching the end, and I'm just noticing it's almost 40 minutes, so I truly do apologize, but I hope someone gained a little bit of wisdom from this. The main nuggets is just, there's two types. The main nuggets, right? Summary, right? It's just you want to find that trigger and reprogram or reprocess the meaning of that trigger. And there's two ways to do this: through visualization and rehearsal of emotional patterns while in a non-emotional state. And the second way is to rehearse or visualize your desired patterns, what you really want to do, while in a non-normal state of being, aka a state of being that you're not normally in. For example, high concentration, focused, energized, those type of state of beings. Unless you're a really energetic person, then that works out for you as well too. And like I said, to change bad behaviors in trading, you have to recognize and redefine what triggers those behaviors in the first place. If you can find the trigger, you can eliminate the bad behavior. If you're struggling with over leveraging and over trading, revenge trading, any bad trading behavior, knowing it automatically gives you a 50% boost to solving the problem. And once you know what problem you're doing, all you got to do is think of what is causing it and change, eliminate, or reprogram the trigger. I hope you guys gain some wisdom from that. And until next time.